The 5th annual Read What You Own Challenge, formerly known as the 100 Book Challenge, has officially begun. Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am a co-host for the 5th annual Read What You Own Challenge. This was a challenge originally started by that evil mastermind Criminali to read 100 books that he already owned before buying another book. And like a fool, 5 years ago, I joined in on that challenge. Over the years, it has morphed into the Read What You Own Challenge, where users or followers can decide how many books they want to read before buying another book. I will provide a link to my video for this year that gives better rules and definitions of this challenge. But this is week 1. Not exactly a full week because it began on Wednesday, November 5th. So I don't have the full 7 days in this week, but I will tell you what I read anyway. The first book I finished was Women Hate Till Death by Hank Jenson. This was on my Kindle. I read 89 pages out of that book, the last half of the book, on Wednesday, November 5th. I am doing the 25,000 page challenge for this year, so I will only count the pages that I read during the actual challenge. So those first 80 some odd pages did not count. Now this is a series of basically crime mystery books written by a British author. I forget his name. The main character in this series is Hank Jenson, which is also listed as the author. This was a series of books that I was introduced to by Gavin at Genre Books, and they are basically crime books, and this was a book written in 1951. The premise of this book is Hank Jenson is a journalist, and he is attending a fancy new automobile display. The Germans are going to be coming out with an atomic car. Unfortunately, one of the presenters winds up murdered. So, of course, Hank Jenson, as a journalist, has to try to discover who murdered this man. He encounters 2 women that have come out of Auschwitz or one of the other death camps. Now, I said this book was in 1951, so the death camps were relatively new at this time. So part of this book is these 2 women's story in the death camps. Now, of course, the 2 stories of the women in the death camp and the murdered man, of course, have to converge because this is a murder mystery. And this is the second book in this series that I have read, although it is not the second book published. I do not believe that all the current books or all the former books in the Hank Jenson series are available in English at this time, and they are certainly not all available on the Kindle. But this was a satisfying mystery. I definitely want to continue reading more Hank Jenson novels. On audio, I listened to The Blanks by Grady, Hendrix. It is about 35 pages long. Now, this is the second Grady Hendrix story that I have listened to. I listened to a few years ago Ankle Snatcher. And I was really impressed with that Ankle Snatcher short story. And this short story, The Blanks, I am also equally impressed. I will eventually have to move on to a Grady Hendrix novel. Well, the premise of this story is there is a family, a mother, her husband, and their 2 children. They are quite well-to-do, and they go spend the summer on this place called Jekyll Island. If I am not completely mistaken, Jekyll Island is a resort island off the coast of Georgia. Very posh. But there is something on this island that the residents and the out-of-towners who stay there all summer long don't like to talk about. It's the blanks. I will leave what it is to the readers who want to discover this story, but I highly recommend it. It is currently only available on Amazon, either as an Audible book or an ebook. Now, I'm not positive about that. They may have a paperback book. I will leave a comment below if it is available in paperback. But if you have a Kindle or if you have Audible, check out this story collection called The Shivers. It is available for Prime users and Kindle Unlimited users, or you can just flat out buy them. For the event Dr. November, I read this book. This was a buddy read with Michelle. This is The Bureau and the Mold by David Vise. He is a journalist. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his journalism, and this was his story of Robert Henson, that notorious American spy. Now, my problem with this book is that the author is a journalist. He has a very journalistic style. He is not a good storyteller. He can research his facts, he can get his facts on paper, but he cannot cohere those facts into an entertaining and engaging short story. Now, this is not a very long book. It is 272 pages, but it felt a lot longer because, as I said, Vise just throws out the details and does not cohere them into a story. He's also a bit of a lazy journalist, at least in this book. Robert Henson wrote some emails, fantasies about his wife having sex. And instead of summarizing all these emails, Vise just quoted them verbatim. And some of these emails went on for like 6 or 7 pages. And why they were supposedly sexy stories, I found these sexy stories rather unsexy, rather boring, and the author really should have just summarized them. And is spying an exciting thing to read about? It should be. He was spying for the Soviets. And Henson's main worry was what to do with all this money that the Soviets were giving him. Because if he spent too lavishly, his superiors or someone might notice that he's spending a lot of money that he should not have. So what's the one thing he wants to do? Or one of the things? Well, pay a stripper a lot of money. And at this time, Henson was rather a devout Christian, so he spent a lot of his time trying to convert her to Christianity. That should have been a fascinating story. It wasn't. I really cannot recommend this book. This book was published in 2001. It is now out of print, I think. If it is still in print, I will leave it in the description of this video or below in the text. Not recommended. Those are all the books that I finished in week 1. But it's not everything that I read. With Michelle, the commenter that I read Bureau and the Mole with, I tried reading the Penkovsky papers by Oleg Penkovsky. This was originally published in the 60s. It is translated from the Russian. Penkovsky was a Soviet spy, and this is his memoirs. This book is dry as dust. Penkovsky was a military officer in the Soviet Union, and his memoirs are essentially notes about what he was doing. Dry as dust. I made it through the introduction and chapter 1, and in chapter 2, you're getting to the actual memoirs that he wrote. And each chapter started off with the translator's introduction, explaining exactly what Penkovsky was talking about. Dry as dust. I made it through 75 pages and decided this is not something that I really want to continue reading. I do like my nonfiction to have a little bit of storytelling to them. Now, I am sure that the details in this would be absolutely fascinating to a researcher, someone like Ben McIntyre, who writes nonfiction about espionage, and he would have to read this book. He could find the story within the memoirs and make it very palatable to a reader. But for me, it was a DNF. I am a co-host for The World According to John Irving. This is a group read for John Irving's book, The Cider House Rules. I read 56 pages yesterday. I had previously read the first 4 chapters. So this is just an ongoing project where we are reading the works of John Irving. We are starting off with the Cider House Rules. It is a fascinating story of a man named Wilbur Larch who runs an orphanage in Maine. But Wilbur Larch does not just run an orphanage, he provides abortion back when abortions were illegal. Wilbur Larch is a fully trained doctor, and in his orphanage is a boy that can't quite get adopted. Parents take him out, try to adopt him, but they return poor Homer. So what does Wilbur Larch try to do as Homer grows older? Well, he's going to train Homer to be a doctor and an abortionist. That is the crux of this story. Now, John Irving is a fantastic storyteller, and he's a storyteller that does not pull punches. Some people in the reading group are a little disturbed at some of the things that John Irving describes. There's a scene of animal abuse. There are scenes of autopsies. There are scenes of abortions and backstreet abortions and clinical abortions. So a lot of people don't seem to be taking too much to John Irving. Now, John Irving, again, as I said, is a brilliant stylist and storyteller, but he has a very 19th century mentality in how a novel should function. At the same time, he's a thoroughly modern storyteller. So I think it is just a great combination. I am having a blast reading the Cider House Rules. This will take me through the end of November. And in December, I will be reading the prequel to the Cider House Rules called Queen Esther. In October, I learned about this book, Alchemized by Sen Lin Yu. It is on the hype train on BookTok. A lot of people love this book, but some people really, truly despise this book. I was watching a video on YouTube by a woman who absolutely was basically frothing at the mouth at her hatred of this book. I did not finish watching that video. I just watched her get mad and frothy and saying how terrible this book was. And the only thing I learned was that this book contained some non-consensual sexual scenes. And I think that was her main reason why she hated it. This is listed as a romantasy. That is a combination of romance and fantasy. I have not gotten too much into the romance section yet, and I am not normally a fantasy reader, but the fantasy world Sen Lin Yu is setting up is rather interesting to this non-expert in fantasy. It's sort of a modern world. They have automobiles, they have cities, and their magic involves raising the dead. That's kind of interesting. I like that much more than casting of spells and riding around on broomsticks. What makes this novel so offensive? I don't know yet. I have not gotten there. During this week, I have read 61 pages. I am actually about 161 pages into it. I read 100 pages before this challenge started. So again, I will only be counting the pages that I read during the challenge. I am eager to find out what makes this book so notorious. So that is everything that I can officially count for my Read What You Own challenge week 1. It comes to a total of 588 pages, but that is not everything that I read. 2 audiobooks that I listened to are excluded because I got them from a library for a buddy read, and I do not own them. The first was Limitations by Scott Turow. It was 197 pages long. This was a buddy read with Randy the Literate Texan. This is part of Scott Turrow's Kindle County series, and it is just a short book. It's, like I said, 197 pages long. And the story is about an appeals court judge named George Mason. He is reviewing a case that is out for appeal of a gang rape of a young 15-year-old girl. From there, you're expecting a normal legal thriller, but Scott Turow goes into a very dark and disturbing direction in Limitations. in the character of George Mason, because as George Mason is reviewing this rape trial, you learn something very nasty about George Mason. And I think, and when I was discussing with Randy, a lot of female readers will be put off by what George Mason did in his youth. And what is he revisiting? A real circuit, or say a real appeals court judge would probably have to recuse himself from that trial. But George Mason can't recuse himself because he would have to confess that something that he did in his past. Maybe you can suss out what I'm talking about just from this running around of the description. But I still liked Limitations. I have had limited experience with Scott Turow. I have read his most famous novel, Presumed Innocent, but this is only the second book by Scott Turow that I have read or listened to. And I'm eager to pick up more Scott Turow because he's a very simple and easy author to read or listen to, but his stories are fantastic. For my in-person book group, I listened to the audiobook of A Man Called Ove by Fredrik, Backman, 337 pages long. This is a very cozy novel originally written in Swedish and translated into English. It is about an old curmudgeonly man called Ove. He's supposed to be a recluse that hates everyone, but of course this is the story of Ove opening up to humanity and showing that inside he is really a good person. Parts of this novel were really a little too quaint for my personal taste, but of course Ove picks up a stray cat. If you know me, if you know my channel, you know I have a soft spot for cats. And as Ove, as the curmudgeon, starts off saying, I don't like cats, you know that Ove and the stray cat are going to become best buddies by the end of the book. That's really not a spoiler. You know that from the first second the cat appears on the page. Did I like the book? Yeah, it was okay. It's going to provide some interesting topics in my book group. But Limitations and A Man Called Ove don't count towards my reading challenge because these are both taken from the library and I don't own them. Anyway, that is week 1. On to week 2. Thank you for watching and keep on reading.